Good day, everyone. So, before I formally introduce to you our topic, I want to start this discussion with a question. Okay, so here's the question. How many of you here have a circle of friends? I know most of you here have circle of friends, right? Now, think about that circle. Are all your friends equally close? Do some friends belong to other groups too? Maybe you have a best friend you share everything with, but also friends who part of your class group and the sports team. That circle of friends isn't a perfect, fixed shaped. It's messy, overlapping, and always changing. And now I welcome you to our topic. Why we consider language as not as perfect as a circle? Well, let's start with the old way of thinking. For decades, researchers used the term speech community to describe a group of people who share common language or dialect and follow the same rules for using it. But here's the problem. And that problem is not that really simple. No? So, as researchers dug deeper, they realized this definition is too rigid. And by that, let us break those issues into some questions. First question, what is speech? Or what is speech anyway? Does it only include spoken words? What about texting slang or sign language? Or even emojis? Are those considered as language? Question number two, where do they draw the line? Imagine a small town where half people speak English and half of the people speak Spanish, but when it comes to shopping, they all shop in one market and they also work together. Is that one community or two? Last question. What do they really share? For example, do all Tagalog speakers in Manila have the same values or ways of talking? For example, a teenager and a 70-year-old might both speak Tagalog, but their slang, accents, and even grammar could be worlds apart. So, is language enough to define a community? Well, that is what we're going to talk about. One of the ideas noted by the researchers is the COP. What is COP? COP means communities of practice. Now, this focuses on what people do together. Take note, it is what people do together, not just what language they speak. Now, for example, think of a group of nurses who work in the same hospital. Towards or in the long run, they develop their own jargon, like stat meaning immediately or code blue meaning a medical emergency. And those terms were used to communicate quickly. They are COP because they used language to do it, even if they speak different first languages. Their shared work creates a language of community. And by that, the term COP or the communities of practice has been derived. We also have another area which is the language networks. No? This sees communities as overlapping circles instead of fixed boxes. For example, think of a student here in Carcor City College. She speaks Cebuano Bisaya with her family, English at schools, and using a mix of both Korean slangs when she's with her classmates. No? And by that, we consider her as part of multiple networks because her language use changes depending on who she is with. This approach acknowledges that language is fluid. We all belong to many groups at once. So why does this stuff matter? Well, let's connect it to the real life situation. First thing is it matters because it speaks behalf on our identity. The way we speak shapes who we are. If you're part of a COP like sports team or music group, the language you use there becomes part of your identity. For example, I know many of us are fan of watching Korean movies or Korean dramas, no? And by that, those students who uses to watch Korean dramas or movies often incorporate some phrases in Korean in their normal conversations with their friends. Also, another thing is that this thing also matter because it speaks or it defines that most people are multilingual. No? For example, in place like Philippines, where many people speak multiple languages, this new approaches helps us understand how people switch between languages and build communities across culture. No, so there are people who uses Taglish, and Taglish isn't a broken Tagalog. It is a creative way to communicate in a multilingual world. Language also can be used to include or exclude. If we only define communities by pure language, we might marginalize people who mix languages like Taglish speakers or people who use sign language. New approaches are more inclusive because they focus on how people use language, not just what language they use. And before I formally end my part, let me take this moment as a realization for everyone that language communities aren't perfect circles. They are messy, overlapping, and always changing, just like your circle of friends, right? The old idea of speech community tried to force people into neat boxes. But new ideas like communities of practice and language networks helps us see the real, beautiful ways we use language to connect. So the next time you talk to someone, notice how your language changes. Are you part of a COP or are you part of a language networks? That would be all, and thank you. I hope you learned something from me. Bye!
Good day, everyone. Please allow me to discuss about the size and location of the community and what is shared by the members of a speech community. So these ideas came from the topic of global communities of multilingual language users. But first, let's have the size and location of the community. That it is a speech that can be a big or small, that may be just having a few people like a family, or a big group like a nation. Just you can see here, it's emphasized as a big or small group from family to nation, and it may exist through online or across countries. And people can belong to more than one communities, because according to John Haviland in the year 2013, that even a family using both sign and spoken language, they can have or generate a unique speech community, because it doesn't depend only on where people live, but like some communities exist online or across countries. So as you can see, we can also belong to more than one speech community at the same time. As for example, if a small family living in Cebu uses both spoken Bisaya and sign language to communicate to communicate an everyday use. So even though they are few in numbers, but they also form as their own speech community, because they share and understand the same way of speaking of it. So now let's have what is shared by the members of a speech community. So the members should share the way of speaking and understanding. They share the common beliefs about language use. They share the language ideologies. That it means that members share on how the way they speak, understand, and use the language. So they may not all speak the same language perfectly, but they can still use their own way on how they can understand each other and how the way they talk, because they can also share their beliefs about and how how language should be used. So these are called as the language ideologists. Like for example, the people are using the ASL or the American Sign Language that they feel may others feel that sometimes people don't notice and they belong to one, but their shared way of speaking showed it by having their own perspectives, like showing the sign languages to easily to communicate even though they don't have the ability to speak in every individuals. And in short, a speech community is a group of people that connected by language and communication habit. It is size and location that can be changed, but what makes it stronger is what members shares their language and how they use it together. And that would be all. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Flora May Minyoza, the third reporter. So let's move forward to the topic of the types of interaction the speech community members have. Speech community members interact through frequent, regular communications, which can be face to face or via technology, to share linguistic norms and build a sense of shared identity. These interactions can include everyday conversations, social gatherings, and participations in specific professional, religious, or hobby-based group. The natures of these interactions allows members to develop and reinforce shared vocabularies, grammatical conventions, speech styles, and rules for how and when to speak. So I have here 4 types of interaction. First is everyday conversation. These are informal exchanges for social connection, such as greeting neighbors, chatting with friends about hobbies, or discussing about daily routine. They rely on shared slang, gestures, and cultural references to build rapport. Everyday conversation often follow unwritten like taking turns speaking and adapting tone to relationship. So I have here examples about the everyday conversation. So the examples is if you have a boyfriend, you are talking to your boyfriend every day like you say good morning, yeah. Are you done eating? That is the examples about everyday conversation. So the second one is professional discourse. Used in workplace or academic settings, the interactions follow formal norms and using technical jargon, structured presentation, or written reports. It focuses on clear communication of ideas and problem solving. So I have examples about the professional discourse. A professor delivering lecture on quantum physics using academic terminology and citing research to explain complex theories. The third one is written communication. Written communication uses written symbol to share ideas, information, or emotions, offering permanence and precision for delayed long-distance interactions. It spans digital formats and print like books, reports, or report adapting to casual or formal context, unlike verbal communication. It relies on grammar and structure to convey meaning, emphasizing clarity to diverse audience. So the last one is digital communication. It involves text messages, social media posts, or online forum, where language is concise and adapted to platforms examples, emojis, hashtag, abbreviation. It allows asynchronous interactions, enabling members to connect across distance. Digital communication blends formal and informal styles with norms like reply promptly or use respectful tune varying by group. So I have here examples about digital communication. Uh, a Twitter thread discussing climate change using hashtag like hashtag save the planet and concise, persuasive language. That's all. Thank you.
This is Hershin Barawigan, and today I am going to explain the alternative to speech community and speech areas. The term speech community is used in social linguistics to describe a group of people who share the same language and social norms for communication. However, many researchers found this concept is too limited or misleading because it assumes all members share the same language and culture, which is not realistic in today's global, multilingual world. The traditional speech communities refers to a group of people who speak one language and have one social rules. But this idea is too limited because people nowadays use different language and speak differently in various ways. We have here 6 inadequacies. First is focuses too much on language, meaning it takes language as central, and it ignores social differences and cultural diversity. The second is emphasizes agreement on consensus, meaning it assumes that everyone in the group or in the community communicates the same way, which is not true. The next is it centers on main members, meaning it often studies groups that are popular or dominant, and it marginalizes speakers or ignores minorities. The next is focuses on the group and not the individual, meaning it overlooks personal ways of speaking, and it forgets that people has its own unique way of speaking. We also have sees identity as fixed, which is not true because people's identity changes. It is not static. It changes over time. Lastly, we have prefers researchers' views over real users, meaning they don't always consider how speakers see themselves. They ignored it. In global communities today, language and identity are flexible, meaning they are changing constantly. Different groups mix languages, borrow words, and use social media, which don't fit in the traditional idea of a single speech community. Let's first read the presentation. Based on Gene Jackson's research in Valpas territory in Colombia and Brazil, the concept of a speech area challenges the idea of one single language community. In this area, people spoke multiple languages and understood as many as 10. She found that people there spoke many languages but still lived together peacefully. This introduced the idea of speech area. We also have here key characteristics of speech area. First is multilingualism is normal, meaning everyone spoke several languages. Next, we have people belonged to language aggregates, meaning group linked by their father's language. And rule of linguistic exogamy, meaning they could not marry someone who spoke the same language. And this helps the spread of multilingualism. Even though people here don't speak the same language, they share social and cultural values. So communication here is not based on language similarity, but on shared social understanding. In today's world, the idea of speech area reflects on how global communities function, like different language coexist, and people still understand one another through culture, values, and shared experiences. So in conclusion, both the ideas of alternatives to speech community and speech areas reminds us that language is more than just words. It is a bridge that connects people across cultures. The traditional speech community no longer fully explains how people communicate in our globalized world, where multilingualism and diversity are normal. Gene Jackson's concept of speech area explains that people can still understand each other without speaking the same language. This highlights that true communication not only depends on language, but also on respect, culture, and shared human connection. And that would be all. Thank you. I hope you learned something.
Everyone, my name is Monique Erica Plaza and I'm excited to share insights from the study of global communities of multilingual language users, focusing the concept of speech networks. Today, we'll explore how social connections shape language used and change in diverse communities. Have you ever noticed how you might speak differently to your best friend than to your teacher or boss? That's because our social connections influence our language. Today, we'll explore how these connections shape the way we talk. Traditionally, studies of language communities focus on defining clear boundaries. However, the reality is much more complex. Many individuals are multilingual, blurring these lines. Jackson's ethnographic work underscores this, showing how factors like marriage customs across language groups challenge our traditional understanding of speech communities. Third slide, as you can see, instead of looking at who you speak what language, we need to understand how people are connected. This is where speech network analysis comes in. It is it is a social-linguistic approach that emphasizes the importance of social ties. Leslie Maylor is a key figure in this field, demonstrated how these ties influence language used and change. Each of us participates in multiple speech networks. Think of your family and your workplace, your friends, your online communities. These networks are dynamic. We moved in and out of them. They can overlap, and smaller networks can be part of larger one. The key is that the nature of our connections within these networks shapes how we use language. Multiplex versus uniplex. Multiplex is connected in multiple ways. For example, a cousin who is also a co-worker speaking the same language at work and family gatherings. The second one is uniplex, connected in only one way. For example, just a classmate using more formal language in class than with your friends. A high versus low density. High density, most people in the group know each other. For example, a small town where everyone knows everyone. Versus low density, people in the group don't know each other very well. For example, a large online forum. So, in this, we can also be connected in multiple ways to the same person, like a cousin who's always a coworker. This is called multi-complex. If we only connected in one way, like just classmates, that's an uniplex. A groups can be tight-knit, high density, or more spread out, low density. Strong multiplex, high-density networks tend to keep language the same, preserves dialects or traditions. For example, a close-knit community speaking their heritage language. Weak uniplex low-density networks tend to change language, introduce new words or ways of speaking. For example, people from different backgrounds using English together. These different types of connections have a big impact of language. Tight-knit groups with strong connections often keep their language the same. More diverse of spread out groups with weaker connection are where language tends to change, with new words and phrases being introduced. So, to sum up everything, the way we talk is really influenced by who we're connected to. Understanding the speech networks help us to see how language changes over time and why we all speak a little differently. Language is alive and it's shaped by our connections with others.
Hello everyone, today I'll be talking about diglossia. Diglossia is a situation where two languages or language varieties are used in one community, but each has its own special purposes. One is called high code or H code, and the other is low code or L code. The H code is used in formal or official situations like giving a public speech, teaching, writing, and broadcasting. On the other hand, L code is used in informal settings like talking to your friends or having a conversation to your family at home. The idea of diglossia was first explained by Charles Ferguson in 1959. At first, it refers to two related varieties of one language. For example, Classical Arabic and its local version. But later on, scholars also use the term to describe the case that involves different languages. The main point of diglossia is that there is a clear separation of language used in society. For example, they speak the L code at home and they speak the H code at work. So in short, diglossia shows how language use can reflect social settings and status in a community.
So, good day everyone. My name is Mariel Dagnosa. So, I am here to discuss about code mixing and code switching. So, do you have any idea, guys, of what is code mixing and code switching? So, now let's start our discussion. So, first, we have a code mixing. So, code mixing is a linguistic phenomenon where speakers mix or two more languages or language varieties within a single conversation, sentence, or even a phrases. So the question of boundaries between language varieties becomes even more complex when considering shifting that occurs mid-sentence or even mid-word. So scholars generally use the term code mixing to describe the sort of shifting that involves a greater sense of hybridity and intermixture between two or more ways of speaking. So, an example of this sort of code mixing can be seen in a common practice among many U.S. Peace Corps volunteers in New and Nepal who would take Nepali verb from such as carry, bokni carry, usually referring to the carrying of a basket on one's back using a thumb line across one's forehead, and add to it an English ending such as ing to create a hybrid Nepali English word and an otherwise English sentence, as in this hypothetical but typical. So we have here I have here a key features of code mixing. So first we have intrasentential. So intrasentential is a mixing occurs within a sentence. So next we have fluent and natural. So speakers usually don't realize they are doing it. It's not confusion, but a fluent of how we blending the words. So next we have social linguistic tools. So often used to to express identity, group membership, or a social status. So lastly, we have a different from code switching. So it involves changing languages between sentences or larger blocks of speech, while code mixing happens within a single sentence or phrases. So, ano siya? So, ang code mix for para mas masabtan siya gali. So, code mixing kay kanang kuan siya linguistic phenomenon where speakers kay mix nila ang duha ka language. So, like for example, diri sa kuan sa Pilipinas. So, like common naman ni siya nga use ang code mixing sabot lang kanang for example like tabi ang barkada or something na then kanang may like ang Tagalog kay ilang sagulan og English. So mao na siya ang code mixing, like ano siya kanang varieties within a single conversation. So next we have a code switching. So code switching is the practice of alternating between two or more languages, dialects, or varieties of language. In a single phrase, code switching kay like mag-switch siya. So like naa siya code switching. So code switching, the sorts of shifts one language variety to another that occur in a single social setting are often considered to be examples of code switching are individuals use two or more language varieties in the same speech event or exchange. Both a linguist, and linguistic anthropologists have sought to demonstrate the ways in which these switches are systematic rather than random. So with linguists focusing on grammatical regulatives rather, and linguistic anthropologists focusing on the social meanings and identities that the code switching indexes. So shift between language varieties will always be multifunctional. That is, they will always have multiple potential social meaning and functions. Through regular linguistic and social practice, they shift will come to be associated with some meanings and identities more than others. So we have here three types. So daghan siya ang types sa code switching, but I include only three types. So first we have intersentential. So intersentential is switching occur that at sentence of boundary. So like for example this, like manay mong barkada nga. Like I'm going to the store. So in Spanish, ang pag switch Spanish is querías algo. So mo na siya ang sa Spanish. And then we have here second, the tag switching. So tag switching is inserting a tag phrase from other language. And lastly, we have situational or contextual. So situational or contextual is a changing language depending on the social context or setting. Like for example, like home versus work, like nana siya. And then so this code switching lends itself beautifully to study by linguistic anthropologists. So the Spanish speaking world of the marketplace on the other. So Monisha in code mixing and code switching. So that's all for today, and
So let's continue to multilingual and transnational linguistic practices. Given the complex of many linguistic communities and their speakers, it is essential no matter which terms researchers use in their analysis to recognize the importance and commonality of multilingualism and transnational linguistics practices. As Marco Hakunet writes, to analyze disparate social networks, we need a unit of analysis that can account for both contagious and non-contagious interactions without clear boundaries. This new conceptualization should enable us to understand communication as virtually boundless heteroglossia or juggling voices and partial identities emerging from a multiplicity of interconnected networks of social norms. So what is multilingual and transnational linguistic practices? Well, it refers to the ways people use more than one language as they communicate across countries, cultures, and social boundaries. It describes how individuals and communities who move, migrate, or live in multicultural societies use language to connect, adopt, and express their identities in different settings. So here's the example number 1. Language loss and insecurity. Mary, a second-year college student, was born in the United States to parents who had immigrated to this country from Vietnam. So Vietnamese was her first language by the time she entered kindergarten. However, she was also quite proficient in English, though she lacked knowledge of everyday idioms. Because Mary was extremely shy, her kindergarten teacher thought she was less fluent in English than she actually was. So she advised Mary's parents to speak to her at home in English only. Her parents did this, and the result was that by age 8, Mary could no longer speak Vietnamese fluently. Mary's story is an example of language shift caused by social pressure. Her experience shows how education systems can unintentionally contribute to the loss of heritage languages. It also highlights the emotional cost. She later describes herself as a victim of the tyranny or the standard, meaning society's expectations. Perfect English made her feel insecure about her linguistic identity. Example number 2. Generational shift in bilingual families. Miguel, a senior in college, was born in the United States, but both of his parents are from Mexico. Miguel has a sister who is 4 years older than he is, and a brother who is 5 years younger. When Miguel was born, his mother was still learning English, so the main language spoken in the home was Spanish. Once Miguel started school, he learned English as well but retained his Spanish fluency. His sister also became completely bilingual in Spanish and English. By the time their younger brother was born, however, their mother's English had improved greatly, and the main language spoken in their home shifted to English. As a result, Miguel's younger brother understands Spanish somewhat but cannot speak it. When the family gets together, they speak a mixture of Spanish and English. His sister, who is married to another bilingual speaker of Spanish and English, speaks only English to her children, so they are now monolingual. Miguel is born to Mexican parents, remained bilingual in Spanish and English, but his younger brother became mostly monolingual in English. This shows how quickly language can shift across generations. In many immigrant families, the first generation maintains the ancestral language, the second generation becomes bilingual, and the third often becomes monolingual, and the dominant national language. Miguel's story also reveals how family language choices adapt to changing environments. In this case, the family's increasing interaction in the English-speaking society. Let's proceed to example number 3, cultural memory without language. Sarah is a bank teller in her 20s, has grandparents who immigrated to the United States from Ireland and Germany, but they spoke Gaelic or German in the home too rarely for Sarah's parents to become fluent in either of these languages. So Sarah was raised a monolingual English-speaking household. Throughout junior and high school, Sarah took Spanish for her foreign language requirement, but she never gained more than a basic proficiency, even that diminished throughout college and beyond because her university did not require students to take any foreign languages, and Sarah chose not to continue taking Spanish. Nevertheless, she speaks English in very different ways to her friends, her parents, and her work colleagues, including her boss. So let's proceed to example number 3. Cultural memory without language. Sarah represents a form of linguistic assimilation. Her story illustrates how, over time, heritage languages fade when families no longer see them as essential for survival. Yet, ever without fluency, the memory of a linguistic just remains as part of a cultural identity or cultural identity rather than daily communication. Let's proceed to example number 4, the deaf community and language beyond speech. Min is a 4th-year student in a pharmacology program. Was born in China with profound hearing loss. Min's mother spent many hours teaching her to lip read and speak Mandarin Chinese intelligibly. When Min was 9 years old, the family immigrated to the United States, and Min spent the next several years learning how to lip read and speak intelligible English. When she entered middle school, she was offered a chance to learn American Sign Language or ASL. And within just a few months, Min felt as though she had found her native language. No longer did she miss what people said when they were torn away from her, and no longer did she have to struggle to be understood. By learning ASL, Min had also become a member of a new speech community, the deaf community. Note the intentionally and proudly capitalized D, with its own cultural and linguistic practices and different norms for communication and interpretation, while Min prefers this speech community to all others. She still lip reads after Pates regularly in many non-deaf communities of practice. Min's story reminds us that language is not only spoken, it is visual, cultural, and deeply tied to community. The deaf community, often written with a capital D, is full linguistic and cultural group its own norms and identity. Her case highlights linguistic empowerment, how finding the right language can give someone voice, confidence, and belongingness. Let's proceed to the last example, relearning a lost language. When Douglas was a toddler, his parents took him to Khan Republic for a year while they did volunteer work there. Though he was completely bilingual in Spanish and English by the end of his time there, he quickly lost his fluency in Spanish. Upon the family's return to the United States, but since reaching adulthood, he has tried to regain his Spanish proficiency in order to interact with Spanish-speaking customers in his store. And after Douglas married and had children of his own, he and his wife, who is monolingual English speaker, decided to send their 2 children to a bilingual Spanish-English summer camp to help them acquire at least a little bit of Spanish. Example number 5. Relearning a lost language. His experience shows that multilingualism is not a fix. It can fade and return depending on motivation and context. It also raises the idea of heritage language reclamation, where people try to reconnect with their linguistic roots. So what does it mean to be a multilingual? Linguist John Edwards argues that being bilingual or multilingual is not unusual. It is the global norm. Around the world, most people grow up speaking more than one language or dialect. Monolingualism, in fact, is the exception, especially in globalized societies where migration and digital communication blur linguistic boundaries. This idea challenges the misconception that multilingualism causes confusion or hinder learning. Instead, multilingual speakers develop flexible, adaptive communication skills that help them move between different social worlds. That's the end of my discussion, and the rest will be discussed by my other groupmate.
Good day, everyone. I am Nia Queen Tarot. I'll be the one to continue what Mrs. Kara started. So, let's continue. First, language versus dialect. It's a political. Many people believe that a language is just a bigger or more complete version of a dialect, but that's not true. In reality, what we call language is often based on politics and national identity, not just grammar or vocabulary. For example, Swedish and Norwegian are considered separate languages, but speakers understand each other easily. Another example, Hindi and Urdu sound almost the same when spoken, but they're treated as different languages because of their different scripts and histories. One side to India, and the other one side to Pakistan. On the other hand, Mandarin and Cantonese are called dialects of Chinese, even though people who speak them often can understand each other. As one linguistic said, a language is a dialect with an army and a navy. So the second one is dialects in social studies. The word dialect is often used for speech that's seen as less prestigious or incorrect. But the truth is, everyone speaks a dialect, even new anchors and politicians. They just speak what's considered the standard dialect. So the third one is registers. Registers is changing how we speak. Besides dialects, there's also something called registers. A register is a way of speaking that matches a specific situation like slang, formal speech, or text talk. Even people who speak only one language can switch between registers depending on who they're talking to. So the fourth one is multilingualism around the world. Multilingualism is very common. Some estimates say that half of the world's population speaks more than one language. For example, in Vanuatu, 109 languages are spoken by just over 200,000 people. In India, people may speak Telugu at home, English at work, and Sanskrit at the temple, all in one day. India shows us that multilingualism doesn't hurt national unity. It's actually part of their national identity. So, let's proceed to the fifth one, the US and language use. The US, about 21% of people speak a language other than English at home, mostly Spanish. But studies show that by the third generation, most immigrant families end up speaking only English at home. So, the idea that English is disappearing is not true. So, in the end, what counts as a language or a dialect often depends more on history, politics, and identity than actual linguistic differences. Multilingualism is normal and in many places even expected. The myth of one nation, one language is just that, a myth. Thank you.
What is heteroglossia? So the word heteroglossia was introduced by Mikhail Bakhtin, a Russian literary critic. It literally means many voices. This describes how different forms of language, such as dialects, accents, and speech styles, coexist and interact in society. So he used this idea to show that there is no single, pure form of language, but rather a mix of voices, shaped by social and cultural differences. Back concept to real-life communication, where people also use different ways of speaking based on who they are and where they come from. It helps explain how language reveals identity and how people express themselves differently in various situations. Language is never uniform or neutral. It changes depending on the speaker and context. People speak differently depending on their age, job, education level, social status, and situation. For example, a lawyer uses formal and technical language. A teacher uses educational and explanatory words, and a teenager uses casual or slang expressions. These differences show that language reflects social diversity and human experience. Bakhtin called these differences. He called these differences stratifications, layers of language shaped by society. Every word carries a certain taste of its background, where it comes from, who uses it, and why. This means that no word is neutral language. Always reflects on culture, values, and power. He also explained that language is shaped by two opposing forces. First one is centralizing or centripetal forces. This push language toward uniformity and standardization. For instance, governments and schools promote a standard way of speaking or writing, such as proper English. The centralizing or centrifugal forces. This encourage diversity and variation as people naturally create new ways of speaking based on their community, identity, or experience. These two forces are always in tension. For example, globalization spreads dominant language like English, but it also leads to migration and mixing of cultures, creating new languages and dialects. In short, heteroglossa helps us understand that language is dynamic, social, and full of diversity. It reflects the ongoing struggle between the desire for one standard language and the natural human tendency for variety and change. In conclusion, the concept of speech community was explored alongside alternative frameworks for understanding multilingualism for both individuals and societal levels. It emphasizes how globalization influences language practices within diverse communities. Phenomena such as code switching and code mixing between languages were highlighted as rich areas for investigating the social and personal dimension of multilingual communication. The most effective analysis of multilingualism integrate both micro-level observations and micro-level insights into language politics, offering a more comprehensive understanding of the complexities involved in multimedia or multilingual interaction. Thank you for listening and good afternoon.